Hi everyone and welcome to Read, Write, Create. My name is Katya and today I'm sharing some books I'll be reading next year thanks to Booktube. Before I do, I want to shout out a fellow small Booktuber channel, and that is Kristanelle SFF Reader. Now, Kristanelle has very similar tastes to me when it comes to science fiction and fantasy, and she has far more titles in her repertoire because she focuses on those two genres, whereas I tend to be everywhere with my genres. So I find when I want a great science fiction and fantasy recommendation, if I check out her mini reviews and her science fiction award videos, I come across some really exciting authors and new titles. So if you are into those genres, then why not check her out? And on to the books. Number 1, Vita Nostra via Fraser Simons. He did a stunning review for this book, and it sounded like dark academia, but with several more layers to it. And I then ended up looking at a number of other reviews and found an interesting comment by Kirkus Reviews, which stated that this sat squarely in the popular school for magician genres. This dark, ambitious, and intellectually strenuous novel will feel like a fresh revelation to fantasy readers glutted with Western wish fulfillment narratives. So I have seen that people feel the Ukrainian side of this novel is really shining through and adding a different element to dark academia to it. It is a translated fiction, and I'm excited about that too because I am trying to consciously read more translated fiction. And then book number 2 is a short story called Assembly and comes through Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, and is described as being a book that examines identity and race in contemporary Britain. And I really enjoyed the comments by Scott unpicking how this main character, no matter what setting she finds herself in, does tend to end up with the menial tasks all the time. So I'd really like to see what the author has done with that, and I'm excited to pick it up like all the other titles. Number 3 has the best title in the world, The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home, and this comes via Rosie Cockshutt, and it sounded deliciously spooky, and I'm not into scary books, but it sounded so interesting in the way that she described it, and the word interesting I'm going to try and ban from my future videos, and you'll discover why at the end of this video. Right, so with The Faceless Old Woman, it turns out that no one knows how she actually got there, because how would you know how some eerie faceless old woman ends up in your home all the time? But it's then told in narrative, so apparently we find out why, with a series of flashbacks going back centuries to reveal to us what's going on. So I'm looking forward to that next year at a spooky time. So perhaps it will be later in the year and I'll save it for October. Number 4, Noopiming via Roz at Scallydandling about the books. Now, the publisher details say that Noopiming translates into English as In the Bush and is a response to English-Canadian settler and author Susanna Moody's 1852 memoir titled Roughing It in the Bush. The publisher also highlights that reading this author's work is an act of decolonization, degentrification, and willful resistance to the perpetuation of centuries-old colonial myth-making. It is a lived experience, and it is a breaking open of self to a world alive with people, animals, ancestors, and spirits who are all busy with the daily labors of healing, and not just healing themselves, but healing their individual pieces of the network, of the web that connects them all together. Enter and be changed. And with an invitation like that, how could I say no? So that went onto my reading list for 2022. Number 5, Square Haunting, also comes through Roz and is summarized by Kirkus Reviews as being an engaging profile of women who found metaphorical rooms of their own in interwar London. Now, I know from Roz's review that there were 5 authors, and the only person that I can actually recall is Virginia Woolf, because she is that person who is, you know, the most famous for her time. So I'm looking forward to discovering about her, but also about the other 4 who are currently nameless in my memory right now. And next we have Trees on a Slope, which again comes through Rosit Scallydandling about the books, but also through Shawn the Book Maniac. And Trees on the Slope is described as one of the few Korean novels to describe in detail the physical and psychological horrors of the Korean War. And the way that Shawn and Roz talked about this, I know that it deeply affected them. And I know it's going to have an impact on me as well. It's going to hit hard, but it does sound like a really important read. Epitaph of a Small Winner via Tristan and the Classics, which Tristan described as a Brazilian classic book that explores the meaning of life and death, one, if not the greatest books in Brazilian literature. He said this book is fresher and more vigorous than most modern novels. So that is certainly an endorsement. I also like the cover. It just makes me chuckle. And because there's these little skulls. Anyway, number 8, the Penguin Book of Japanese Short Stories via the Codex Cantina. And I think I've got that one to hand. So Una and Crypto have been providing some in-depth, thought-provoking discussions about some of the stories in this book. And it made me want to read the stories myself. I may now know what some of these stories are about, having seen the breakdown of them. But I actually find that that's piqued my interest even more because I want to know, will I have similar or different thoughts and feelings on these stories? So certainly looking forward to it, as I am with all of them. So the next one is Fireborne. And again, I've got the copy to hand, which is good. Fireborne via the Nerdy Narrative, a fantasy with dragons, which has a cherry on top of being loved by Leslie. I knew I had to read it, and then I saw that the author had this book endorsed furthermore by Rachel Hartman, who is the author of Serafina. Rachel Hartman said that this book has everything that she would want in a fantasy. And I love Hartman's work, so I'll link my review to Serafina by Rachel Hartman. Suffice to say that I loved her depiction of dragons in her world, so I'm very much looking forward to this one. Next up, we have A Grandmother Sends Her Regards and Apologises, and that comes via Scientist Reading World. And Hugo so loved this book. He kept saying that it was unique, different, tricky to describe, and that immediately made me interested. So it has a granny telling fairy tales to the main character Elsa, and as long as she's been able to remember, she recalls these fairy tales. And in the beginning, they seemed only to be there to make her go to sleep, and to get her to practice Granny's secret language. But as she gets older, she starts to realize that perhaps there's another dimension to these stories as well, something she can't quite put her finger on. So I am looking forward to discovering what that other dimension is. And there was also an element from a couple of the other reviews that I looked into, because I always check to see anything that I put on my TBR as a potential, I look up again. And there was a comment by someone to say that they felt this is the sort of book that you will have a different experience each time based on what your own personal experience is at the time of reading it, which intrigues me even more. Then number 11, Come Fly the World, the Jet Age story of the women of Pan Am, and that comes via Hannah's Books. So I thoroughly enjoyed Hannah's video in November on Women on the Move in a Changing World, in which she discusses books that examine travel and women's history. So stewardesses serving on the iconic Pan Am between 1966 to 1975 had to have a college degree and speak 2 languages and possess an amazing political savvy, whilst also physically having to meet the beauty standards of being between 5'3" and 5'9", and between 105 and 140 pounds in weight. They also had to be under the age of 26 at the time of hire. So I'm looking forward to the history of air travel, but also with that added element of the personal real-life stories of the stewardesses of that era. Number 12, Dawn Raid by a Polynesian reader. And this is perhaps the first Pacific Islander author that I'll be reading, because I certainly can't think of any other author that I have read who is from the Pacific Islands. And it says, imagine this. You're having an amazing family holiday, one where everyone is there and all 18 of you are squeezed into one house. All of a sudden, it's 4 o'clock in the morning and there's banging and yelling and screaming, but the police are in the house pulling people out of bed. It comes as a surprise to Sophia and her family when her big brother, Lenny, starts talking about protests, overstayers, and injustices against Pacific Islanders by the government. Inspired by the Black Panthers in America, a group has formed called the Polynesian Panthers, who encourage immigrant and indigenous families across New Zealand to stand up for their rights. Soon, the whole family becomes involved in the movement. Told through Sophia's diary entries with illustrations throughout, Dawn Raid is the story of one extraordinary girl living in extraordinary times, learning how to speak up and fight. And then we go on to Winter in Sokcho, which comes through Rainierbooks. And I loved Reiner's review for this and his delight at the author winning a translated fiction award this year. It was actually first written in 2016. And it says, it's winter in Sokcho, a tourist town on the border of South and North Korea. The cold slows everything down. Bodies are red and raw. The fish turn venomous. Beyond the beach, guns point out from the North's watchtowers. A young French-Korean woman works as a receptionist in a run-down guest house. One evening, an unexpected guest arrives. A French graphic novelist determined to find inspiration in this desolate landscape. The two form an uneasy relationship. She agrees to accompany him on his trips to discover an authentic Korea. And I won't read the rest of it because I think sometimes these write-ups do give a little bit more away than they should. But it certainly comes highly recommended and is right up my street, I think. So I feel like this is going to be a 5-star read. We'll see. Now, a very recent addition to my list is Disposable City through Margaret Pinard. And this is from just a week ago because Margaret did this live with her recommended reads. And this book is a deeply reported personal investigation by a Miami journalist who talks about Miami, Florida being likely, or actually is predicted to be entirely underwater by the end of the century. Now, residents are already starting to see the effects of sea level rises today, from sunny day flooding caused by higher tides to a sewer system on the brink of total collapse. The city is undeniably living in a climate-changed world. And I was thinking, since I've been reading a lot of climate fiction lately, why not read climate fact? As depressing as it may be, it is a reality that we're currently living in. And I have seen quite a few pieces of news about Florida recently, and it's got me interested to know what's happening there. I mean, a lot of other countries are also very affected. I think Bangladesh sounds to me as though one that has been in the news for a very long time, suffering the effects of climate change. Anyway, number 15, Impossible Country, comes through Anne with a book. South Korea was the poorest, most impossible country on the planet when it was founded, according to the advisor of its third president. Yet, in just 50 years, it has transformed itself into an economic powerhouse and a democracy that can serve as a model for other countries. So this book is looking at how was it able to do this, despite having been sapped by almost half a century of colonial rule, ruined by war, partitioned, and actually lacking in democratic tradition. So who are the Korean people who achieved the second Asian miracle? Number 16, Making Kin via AnattyNook. So this is a book that I couldn't find anywhere else except on the publisher's site. And the publisher is Ethos Books in Singapore. Their site might be down when I'm putting this up because they were going to be down for the weekend, but they'll be back up on Monday, the 6th of December. Making Kin is a collection of eco-feminist essays from Singapore and contemplates and recenters Singapore women in the overlapping discourses of family, home, ecology, and nation. For the first time, this collection of eco-feminist essays is focusing on crafts, minds, bodies, and the subjectivities of a diverse group of women making kin with the human and non-human world as they navigate their own lives. From ruminations on caregiving to surreal interspecies encounters to indigenous ways of knowing, these women writers chart a new path on the map of Singapore's literary scene, writing urgently about gender, nature, climate change, reciprocity, and other critical environmental issues. And I love the sound of this. It does say, in a climate-changed world where vital connections are lost, Making Kin is an essential collection that blurs boundaries between the personal and the political. It is a revolutionary approach towards intersectional environmentalism. What I discovered as well on the site for the publisher, although it's not linked on the actual page where you buy the book, so just for your information, if you do go there to buy it, they have a book club as well. And within that book club, they had a pack of, different questions and things that you could explore about the book. So I downloaded that kit as well, and that's something else for me to look forward to looking at. Number 17, The White Book by Han Kang via Books and Bao, and Willow mentioned that they've read all 3 books that have been translated by the author, but this book seems to have the least press. It is a meditation on color beginning with a list of white things. It is a book about mourning, rebirth, and the tenacity of the human spirit. It is a stunning investigation of the fragility and beauty and strangeness of life, translated from the Korean by Deborah Smith. And I'm interested, and I have to stop using that word, I am interested to read this because I've been contemplating the use of color as symbolism in literature, especially because I read Lemon earlier this year, and I'll link to the mini review video that I have which mentions Lemon, and that had the color yellow within it, and it served as a wonderful way to have the symbolism around the color yellow. It is a murder mystery with a twist, and the victim is wearing a lemon yellow dress. But within it, I went hunting to see if there were very many people who talked about the symbolism of the color yellow in it, and I found that there weren't very many. So I'm going to actually also link in the video description the one review that I found, which was from Asian Book Reviews, I think it's called, and they hit the nail on the head for me because they said, the color yellow comes up significantly, but they also made the link that this is perhaps a sort of homage to James Joyce, which I didn't pick up on, but 2 characters within the book talk about James Joyce, and he did the study of color in a couple of his novels as well. But I'm getting sidetracked. I am looking forward to this. It is also supposed to be quite autobiographical. Number 18, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous via Ellias. So this book is said to be a letter from a son to a mother who cannot read, written when the speaker, Little Dog, is in his later 20s. The letter unearths a family history that began before he was born, a history which has its epicenter rooted in Vietnam and serves as a doorway into parts of his life his mother has never known, all of it leading to an unforgettable revelation. So those are the 18 books that I'll be reading in 2022. I had considered making it 22 books, but I realized that I had actually said I was going to read 20 titles for 2021 with an optional extra, and of those I have read 14 so far. I'm not holding out much hope for reading all the other 6 this month. I'll let you know in my wrap up for the year which books I read and which I'm keeping on my TBR, and whether there's any I've decided to cross off entirely. Before I head off though, I'd like to add that this week I'm loving Gunpowder Fiction and Plot's Booktube video, How Language Affects Reviews, a panel discussion. I found it insightful and, dare I say, hopefully for the last time, interesting. If you haven't seen it yet, then you might like to take a peek. So do let me know in the comments whether you've read any of these books, whether they're on your TBR, and if you want to buddy read any of the titles. Thanks again so much for joining me, and until next time, bye.